Good evening from Blades Music. This video is about Cakewalk by Bandlab versus Studio One version 5 point, whatever you happen to be on right now. It's December 2020, and this video is going to go over some of the differences between the two and why I've chosen what I have coming up. So I want to start this video with a little bit of a history. I had been with Cakewalk from the time they were 12-tone through Roland, through Gibson, and then in November 2017 when Gibson sold off or really shut down the Sonar product, I had been with the lifetime updates. And the concern was that the update servers were going to shut down, and there was going to be no more access to that Sonar product. And at that time, I made a decision to go look for another DAW. Then come about April 2018, this product was picked up by Bandlab and revived, and the intellectual property purchased from Gibson and reformed into what is now a free product, Cakewalk by Bandlab, which is effectively Sonar Platinum, less all of the third-party additional stuff. It's actually a very good package, and if you have no other options for a DAW, I would say on the free side of things, it's actually probably about your best option that you've got out there. But at the time, I had been looking at Studio One, and one of the reasons why I did that was because I was afraid I was going to lose access to it, but it was also an opportunity to look into, well, what is available out there, because, you know, sometimes you get set in your ways of using a certain product, and you just will use it forever until you have some reason to look for something else. So I want to kind of go through a little bit of a part 1, part 2, part 3 kind of a deal on this, but I'm going to try and do it in a single video. And I've tried to create this video a number of times. I've run into some technical difficulties. I don't know if it's somebody saying, hey, just don't make the video, but I'm trying to get this thing out there. So in part 1 here, I want to go over the pros for Cakewalk, because there are some things that I think that the Cakewalk product actually does really well. And maybe even does better than Studio One. So the first of those is what's called sound-on-sound recording. So I'm going to bring Cakewalk up here on the screen, and you can see here is the Cakewalk interface up there. And sound-on-sound recording can be accessed by clicking and holding on the record button. Then you can see your different modes: comping, overwrite, and sound-on-sound. And the main thing that's appealing of sound on sound is if you already have something recorded for a region and you start to record at the beginning of that, you can still hear what was underneath on the previous version of that recording, which gives you some context to do the new recording in. This is a function that Studio One does not have. Now, when I go over the pros for Studio One, I'm going to tell you the offset for that, and that being the what do we call this? Pre-roll. So pre-roll is kind of a different option that they have in Studio One that's not available in Cakewalk. That kind of offsets that function. Kind of related to the sound-on-sound is also the way that loop recording and punch-in recording work in Cakewalk. Both Cakewalk and Studio One, of course, have punch-in recording, but punch-in recording in a loop in Cakewalk is a little bit better. And the reason I say that is when you set your regions in Cakewalk, you can select an area, and you'll see you get this green outline above there. That's kind of the selected area. And when you mark that as the loop points, you'll see you get this little yellow area in addition to the green one. And then you can also select inside of that area and set your record punch points. And so now you can see that you've got Your loop points are on the outside and your record punch in, punch out are inside of that loop. So when you put the whole thing in loop mode, you loop to just before what you're going to start recording. You do your recording, get a little bit of extra time to prepare yourself. When it loops back around, you come out before the recording, and then it starts recording again. Studio One does not have this option. When you put your region that you're going to loop on, the loop area is the same area as the record area is. So that's kind of a downside to Studio One. And again, just something to get used to. There are plenty of things to offset that. Another advantage, I'll give a slight advantage to the drum mapping in Cakewalk. So when I originally did the switch, there was basically no drum mapping at all in Studio One. And in Cakewalk, if you've watched any of my videos before, you know I've done a video going into depth on how to create and how to use and why you would want to use a drum map in Cakewalk. So when I went over to Studio One, I didn't find a drum mapping capability at all. Now, since then, they have drastically improved on that. I believe it came in version 4. When I switched over to Studio One, I was in the 3 point whatever version. I believe that they added all of the drum mapping in version 4 and version 5. It's still not as fully fleshed out, but it's actually prettier. So when you look at, a drum map track in Cakewalk, this is what it looks like. And you've got all your notes over here on the side. And you have the ability to solo and or mute individual MIDI notes within your MIDI track. That's one of the features that doesn't exist in Studio One. Another thing that I don't think you can do in Studio One is when you go into the actual mapping of this, you can map one inbound note to a different outbound note. And the reason this would be useful is if you have a drum kit like I do back there, and you're recording some stuff in, and my snare drum is always going to be on note number 38, or in this case, my kick drum is going to be on note number 36 every time. But let's say, for example, my VST instrument has the kick drum that I want to use on this track on note number 37. Well, I can go in there and I can mark the out note to note number 37. And so anything that I recorded will automatically change. And I don't have to go in there and transpose it literally. So if I point to different VSTs, I can just change the mapping of it without having to change the transposing of it. Now, that said, I don't really do that much. In fact, I basically don't do it at all now that I have my Pearl Mimic Pro, and all of the drum kit sounds that I'm mostly going to use are going to come from there. And for the few exceptions that I'm going to have, doing the transposition of an individual note, not a big deal. So that has largely gone out of the I care window. Now, looking at that in Studio One, we do have the drum mapping capability. So I'm just going to create myself a region here in Studio One, which I have to turn my MIDI track back on, and then we're going to create that. And so now here we are in the drum map view, and you can see on the left-hand side, I still have all of my notes. I still have it limited down to the notes that I want to see, as opposed to when it's just in musical notation, you see the whole keyboard. In drum map notation, I get to compress that down to only the notes that I want to see. One of the things I actually like better about the way Studio One does this is you can see I have all of these color-coded regions, so it's really easy to see where my snares and hi-hats and toms and rides and crashes and everything are by color within that region, something that completely lacks in the Cakewalk version here, where you see that it's just all gray. But you do notice that I don't have the solo and mute capability, and I also don't have the ability to map one note to a different note. It's really just about what's visible on the screen. But aside from that, most of the other features are very similar. Another thing for the drum maps that kind of goes to Cakewalk is if you happen to have a note in here, you can see here on the note value, I can actually adjust that velocity right there on the note. And when you have a number of different notes in play, you can see their relative velocities right there in the note pane. Versus in the, not that one. In the controller pane down here at the bottom, you can also see those velocities. But these velocities are, as you can see here, they're kind of representative of all of the different notes. One of the benefits here, again, to Studio One, if I have, notes that are in place on my MIDI track here, while I can't adjust the velocity at the note itself, when I go down here to the velocity, and we're going to go and let's put a couple other notes in here. As I select my different instruments within my MIDI track, you can see that the velocities below match the notes for the kit piece that I've selected above. So that kind of makes up for the Cakewalk loss on not having the individual velocity tails on a per note basis. All right, so I'm going to get out of the drum mapping thing. I'm also going to give the visual preferences on Cakewalk a little bit of an advantage. And the reason I'm going to do that is because in Cakewalk, like right now, I'm using the tungsten view. But if I went into my preferences and down into my themes customization, you could see I could even go to like something like Mercury, and it changes the entire GUI. It changes all of the backgrounds, all of the colors. It's all a blue on gray kind of a look and all of that sort of thing. Versus in tungsten, you can see everything is kind of more of an amber color background and all. But the main difference here is that you can adjust pretty much anything. There's even a theme editor in here where you can get to a ridiculous level of customization in this. Same thing here also with the colors, where you can adjust which colors each track has, whether it's MIDI or audio. What does the waveform look like versus the background? There's all kinds of customization that can happen in Cakewalk, and Studio One definitely has a lot less in that regard. Now, that said, I also found when I came to Studio One, I started focusing less on what does the GUI look like and more on what am I working on. There are some areas for sure I think that could improve here. You do still have in the general appearance section of the options in here a bunch of colors, a bunch of options for how those colors are applied. So for example, you can see that right now I've got my hue is shifted towards blue, but if you'll watch this area up here, if I happen to like that to be more of a yellow color or a red color or whatever, I can change the overall scheme to something like that. You can change the luminance. So if this area under background is going to be all of this area here on the left, it's going to be the way that the mixer looks, all of those kinds of things. So you can see that my luminance over there changes those luminance values. So now I'm kind of more in a brighter mode. You'll notice that the arrangement area is still dark, so I can change that luminance as well, right? So I can make the whole thing much brighter and lighter. Personally, I like them to be darker. I like the dark mode look. And you can also change things like the contrast on here, so you can see that the text colors get brighter or really muted. I like mine somewhere in the middle. Same thing like with the grid lines and whatnot can be changed back here to get a little bit more or less. You can choose what the backgrounds of the plugins are going to look like. So there's still a lot of options to make it look like you want to look, as well as, if I get out of here, I'm going to go back to my original colors. You can, in the default, you can go in here and you can change every individual track, all the colors, or if you get the colors plugin, you can come up here and you can customize using all of these. Or if you expand that out, you can get even more colors and you can create groups of colors and things like that that you can apply to all of your different tracks to keep things organized and consistent. So you're using the same blues for your tracks, for example, which is where this is, or your buses for drums, which is where that is, and so on. So you can get pretty specific like how these things look, and that goes over into the mixer as well. You'll see those color selections follow from the arrangement and the track view over into the mixer view. And that's kind of the end of the pros for Cakewalk. And of course, I've been kind of intermingling the Studio One stuff in there with that. So cons for Cakewalk. In general, I found that the GUI is a little bit more sluggish. Now, I will say that since I rebuilt my computer, that the GUI is way better in the newest version of Cakewalk. And I don't know if that's the rebuild of my computer or if it's the latest version of Cakewalk or some combination of the two. It is better, but it's still not quite as snappy as Studio One. Studio One is just, everything is immediate. When you click it, it happens. In Cakewalk, it feels like there's just a tiny several millisecond delay in whatever you do that makes it feel like it's not quite as stable. But like I said, this has improved dramatically as of my last installation of the product. So I'm not going to rail on that too much. Latency does feel a little longer, and pops and clicks for the same sound card, yet the same latency using the same ASIO driver. Feels like I have more pops and clicks in Cakewalk, and I have to adjust my latency according to whether I'm recording or mixing more often. In Studio One, I pretty much never touch it. I have my latencies stuck at 64 samples and kind of low dropout or minimum dropout protection, and everything just works, and I don't even really ever think about it. And that is really important to me when I'm recording. I don't want to be thinking about the technology, especially when the technology fails me. I really don't want to be thinking about it then, because my creative process is completely interrupted and I don't have enough time to deal with creative as it is. Drag and drop, not as complete in Cakewalk. And this was one of those things that when I originally got Studio One, what made it very approachable and very usable for me was how simple the drag and drop stuff is. And let me give you a quick example of that. So if I'm in the, I'm going to go into the console view here in Cakewalk. And I'm also going to show my browser window. And so if I'm here in my audio effects and I want to put an effect on the vocal channel, let's say I want to put on this Abbey Road Chambers mono stereo, and I click and I drag it over here. You can see I could just put it on the FX channel. No big deal, and that would work. But if I try to drag it here to the send, I can't do that. And ordinarily, if I'm going to put a reverb on a vocal, I'm going to do it on a send so I can send multiple different vocals to that. I can't just drag this onto the track send. So what I have to do instead of that is I have to come over and create a new send, which I can't, let's see, I can do that from here. So if I say I want to insert a new stereo bus, and we're going to call this, we'll call it AR for Abbey Road, right? And then I can go and I can drag this thing into that track, and you'll see my Abbey Road studio shows up here. And then I can come back over to my vocal and I can say I want to create a send, and I want to create that send going to AR. And now I'm actually ready to use this thing. Now let me show you that same process in Studio One. So we're going to go to the mixer, And I'm going to drag this up so I can see a little bit more of what I'm doing. And I'm going to come over to my effects, and you can see that I've got my waves, Abbey Road Chambers, mono stereo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this right onto the send of the vocal. And what happens is I immediately get the send is added, a send is created, the plugin is added to that send, and the send is enabled, as you heard there. It's very much faster, and that goes throughout the entire interface. Every single thing that you think I ought to be able to click and drag this, I ought to be able to drag and drop this. In Studio One, it works that way. And in Cakewalk, it always feels like there's 10 steps that I have to take to set something up. It's less inspiring to not have that immediacy available to you. Buses, to me, in Cakewalk are less flexible. So another case of that, similar kind of scenario. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to remove that bus, and I'm going to remove this send right here. So now we're kind of back to where we were. So right now I've got these 3 tracks are going to this one bus. Let's say, for example, I just wanted to have my backups go to a new bus. In Studio One, I can very easily say, add a bus for the selected channels. Bam, there's my bus. I give it a new name. I'm finished. And then I can have the output of this bus go to the actual vocal bus. So right now I have my backups getting sent automatically to this thing called bus 1. And then bus 1 is getting sent over to the vocal bus because that's where those tracks were originally destined to go. Now, of course, you could just take this whole vocal bus and send it out to the main or whatever you wanted to do with it. It's very immediate. In Cakewalk, doing that same kind of thing, it just feels like there's always more steps to everything, like I was saying with the drag and drop. The mixer is locked in place, and this is another one of those things that mattered to me when I started using Studio One is the flexibility of the mixer. One of the things that I always thought I really liked about the Cakewalk mixer was the, I'll call it skeuomorphism, or the it looks like a real mixer design. The fact that there's some 3D capabilities. One thing that I really like in here are the fact that we do have track icons. I wish we had some of those available, or at least I used to wish it. Now I don't know that I care that much. There's a lot of complexity to the way this thing looks, but there's no flexibility to what you can do to it. So for example, this gain that's up here at the top, you see this big block that's up here. I can't change the size of that. So this tiny little knob right here is taking up this huge block. I would much rather that was divided up between the FX and the sends, or that I had a longer fader at the bottom. But I have neither of those things, nor a way to change it. In Studio One, I don't have that kind of thing going on. If you look at the Studio One mixer, and go ahead and make this a little bigger, you can see that I've got a whole lot of space up here. And you have the options to, turn on a bunch of these things on or off. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the input controls because that's basically the same thing as those gain controls that were at the top. We've got our gain knob right here. We've got our phase polarity underneath. So I turn those on, but you see how small that is. And then underneath I have my inserts and I have my sends, and I can adjust those. So you can see I can give more space to the inserts or the sends. Or let's say I just really needed more space for the faders, and I don't need all that space for the inserts and the sends. I can drag those way up and I get a lot more on the metering and on the faders for that. Or I could take the whole thing and make it the compact version where I get the this, and I don't have the sends and the inserts, but if I double click, I get them on the side over here where I can see my inserts and sends for each track. And then as I click on the track, it'll take me over to that one's inserts and sends. So there's a lot of flexibility in the mixer that simply doesn't exist in Cakewalk. Now, there are some things in the Pro channel on the Cakewalk mixer that that are nice, like being able to expand out, for example, the Pro channel feature here on the Cakewalk mixer. But many of those features also exist kind of similarly in the event that you had, let's say, for example, I had the Fat channel, which is one of the built-in Presonus things. Let's find the Fat channel, and we're going to pull that over here as an insert. And you can see, so here's my Fat channel, and I've got the, you know, same kinds of things you have on the Pro channel, a compressor, a gate, an equalizer, a limiter, or whatever. If I enable some of these, so let's say I, you know, enabled my EQ and I went over to the EQ module and I did some modifications to that. And of course, you're not hearing any of these because these are in Cakewalk and that's not where my vocal is. You can expand the Fat channel so that you can see those items right here in the insert, and you can actually adjust them as well, and you can get through the different modules. So there's a lot of the flexibility without some of the annoyance, and being able to get in and out of those pieces and parts of the mixer. So for Studio One, the pros are kind of like the opposite of all of those things that I mentioned above. The recording pre-roll, which is a, you know, like an ability. Let's take a look at this real quick. If I put the vocal here in record mode, you'll see I'm here at measure 3, and I've got pre-roll enabled. And when I go into the description, you can see my pre-roll is enabled for 1 bar. So if I'm here at measure 3, I've got record enabled on this track, and I hit record, you'll see I get a measure of pre-roll, and then it starts recording. Kind of like punch in. The difference is there's no punch out. So this is just going to keep on recording beyond that point. And then, of course, I can just, you know, undo that. Pre-roll is kind of cool in that you get that same sound on sound, kind of I get to hear what's going on before I start recording, and then I automatically start recording, but it's also not going to pull me out of the recording later. There is, of course, the ability to do punch, which will do punch in and punch out. That's a different scenario. Stop, undo, and rewind are all plugged into a single action. So if you are recording, and this happens to me a lot as someone who I have to record a lot of takes on things. And so in Cakewalk, I actually wore out my contour shuttle by hitting stop, undo, rewind, record, stop, undo, rewind, record, stop, undo, rewind, record. And eventually I wore the buttons out because I do it so many times for every single take. In Studio One, if you hit undo while you're recording, it does all of that, except for the, you know, starting the recording again, of course. So let me give you an example of that. So I'm going to come over here again. I'm going to start here at 3. We're going to get my pre-roll from 2 to 3. And now I'm actually recording. And now I'm going to do this. You could do this with Control Z or whatever. I'm going to do it here on my FaderPort. I'm going to hit undo. And now I've undone it. And I can hit record again. And I am ready to go. And I start recording here. And it's recording my vocal. And then I've decided I don't like that. So I hit undo. And it automatically stops it, undoes it, deletes it, puts me back where I was ready to start recording again. And bang, I hit record. It's a huge, huge time saver that we didn't have a way to do before in Cakewalk. Another thing is macros and the way that the macros work in Studio One. Now in Cakewalk, there was a thing called Cakewalk Application Language, or CAL, and there were some scripts that were available for doing things like, you know, thinning out MIDI, or a handful of different ones like splitting notes to tracks for drums and that kind of stuff. But basically what came with it, I think, is pretty much most of what most people used, because the Cakewalk application language was next to impossible for laymen to program. And I'm a programmer. And I looked at it and I was like, what is this? Is this weird infix, postfix, prefix notation kind of syntax on it? It's very odd to me. Again, I've done programming and stuff, but just didn't really dig into it because it was honestly just such a pain to use. You use the cals that were available and that was it. In Studio One, they have macros available and anybody can use these. So if you expose your macro toolbar, these are just some of the example macros, and these are clickable buttons here at the top. You can assign any of those to a keystroke, and you can use any of the ones that they have built in. There's all kinds of musical editing, like, select and deselect and select every third note and select the lowest or the highest, or change the velocities on things for MIDI notes. You can come into audio and you can normalize, you can add some layers all at once. In the music editing, you can do things like for time and tempo, and all of these macros are all kind of built in here where you can fill with eighth notes, you can fill with 16th notes. There's all kinds of these macros built in here, but making these macros for yourself is also not difficult. You just go into the macro organizer and you say new, and then you choose a command on the left, you add it, and it automatically builds out the macro. Some of these commands have additional arguments that you can add, or parameters or whatever. And it just makes it really easy to program these macros yourself. So let's say I'm going to do something that, is probably not very useful, but say I wanted to select all. So I say select all, and then I'm going to say I want to delete. And I say delete, and I add that in there. I click OK, I give it a title, I put it in a group if I want to, give it a description if I want to. And now I have a macro that says select everything and delete it. And then you can go into the Studio One keyboard shortcuts, and you'll see down here in the section at the bottom of keyboard shortcuts, all of your macros that you've created are available, and you can select a macro and you can enter a key and automatically assign a key to that macro to fire it off. It's really easy to stack up a number of different commands together and hit them with a single key or a button across the top of the screen or whatever you want to do. Macros are one of those kinds of things that when I first looked at Studio One, huge game changer. Another one of those is something called the splitter. This one can get pretty complicated, and there are entire videos based on this, and you could do all kinds of crazy things with this. I'm going to give you a very quick example. And to do that, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to the channel editor. And then you'll see this little icon up here for the splitter. Now I'm going to simplify my screen a little bit just so you can see this. So you can see this is the vocal channel that I'm on. And you can see that right now all I have is the console one, which you can see here at the top of my mixer chain. And I'm going to take a splitter and I'm going to drag that right here. And so now you can see now I've split whatever comes in here at the beginning of the channel is going to split to these two rails. And those rails are defined by normal channel split or frequency split. This is something that just flat out doesn't exist without doing your own manual routing, and that's kind of a thing in Cakewalk. So in here, normal means that I'm going to take this same signal, I'm going to send it down both of these lanes. If I do channel split, it means I'm going to take this signal and I'm going to send this to the left and this to the right. And frequency split means that, and you probably already heard this kind of happen when I just did that recording. Frequency split means that it's going to split that based upon what's underneath a certain frequency and what's above a frequency, and you can adjust different things according to those different paths. So this will make more sense in just a second, but you can also see that you could even do, say 3 splits. So I could do 3 frequencies, think multi-band compressor kind of a thing. You can do 4 splits. You can do splits within splits. You can do multiple splits within splits inside of splits. And you can see how quickly this could get completely creative and out of hand, out of control maybe. But, you know, there's a ton of capabilities within this. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that second split. And then I'm going to turn this one back to 2 because I want to make this simple. And I'm going to put this in channel split because I think this is the easiest thing to see. And so what we're going to do here is on the left-hand side of this channel split, I'm going to put a reverb. And so we're going to use the mix verb, which is just built in Studio One. So now in the channel split, we're going to have this go to the left-hand side. Now, right now, I have my lead vocal is set to mono, so we're going to go ahead and make that. Make that stereo, and then we're going to make it, of course, on the right input. And so now, over here on the left-hand side, you can hear that mix verb is happening over there. And now I'm going to take and put a delay on the right, reverb, and delay. And for each one of those, of course, I can turn them off here, or I can turn off the whole thing. So I'm going to turn off the delay side of this right here. So you see I've broken that chain, and so now you hear the reverb side of that, but not the delay side of it. And now you hear the delay side of it, and not the reverb side of it. And so you can see that there's a total control thing that can happen here with the splitter. Like I said, this can get really complex really fast. There's a ton of features on here. A separate video is in order. And there's a bunch of them out there that you can find. But basically, there's all kinds of flexibility that this allows you within an individual channel without having to even stack up effects and things like that out over on the buses. You can create all kinds of mayhem in here in the splitter. Again, something that Cakewalk just doesn't even have. My personal preference, and this is one of those preferential things, is I like the stuff that's built into Studio One better than I like the stuff that's built into Cakewalk. Case in point, the Pro channel versus the Fat channel. The Fat channel in Studio One has, to me, a lot more options going on, and I had that on this second channel here. And so from a compressor, EQ, and limiter perspective, you can see you've got your standard compressor, you've got your EQ. I've got a handful of different options, the standard and a passive, and also a vintage. Same thing with the compressor. We've got the standard, a tube compressor, and a FET compressor. This stuff's all built in. I personally think the GUIs are better on this stuff than they are in Cakewalk. You can also stack these up so you can see the whole thing and the whole chain of things that are going on. I like the way they look better. I like the way they sound better. And if you happen to be a Sphere member, or if you buy the add-on packs, you can actually get some additional compressors, some additional EQs that you can plug into here that have, you know, their own vintage sound and that kind of a thing. And then on the instrument side of things, under Presonus, we get Impact, we get Mai Tai, we get Mojito. Mai Tai being analog, Mojito being a kind of a little digital synth, I think. I haven't really used Mojito a whole lot. Presence, which is the sampler, which is kind of like Dimension, I guess, if you didn't have anything else to compare to. And then Sample One, which does all kinds of cool things for being able to even take parts that are within your recording and drag them right in there and use them as parts of a sampler. Sample 1 is basically a sampler. Those features are things that I like the way that they're built in, particularly because they're part of the Studio One ecosphere, instead of relying on third-party programs from other manufacturers that get special key codes for Cakewalk users and all of that. These are made by Presonus, and they can be used in Studio One, and they're actually pretty cool little products in and of themselves. And then the last bit, and I think this is kind of probably unfair, in my case, when I made this switch, I also went out and I bought a Presonus audio interface. So I've got the Studio 1824 over there. And then I've also bought a FaderPort 8 to control it. Now I can use both of these in Cakewalk. The Studio 1824 works perfectly fine as an audio interface to Cakewalk. I do have some additional capabilities in Studio One. So you might have seen this earlier. Over here, I have the ability to turn on the phantom power for the inputs. And then I also have the ability to change the first 2 inputs between mic and line, to mute the main output here, which is what I have going on right now, so I can use my mic without feeding back. And then also sum to mono. All of those are hardware buttons on the actual audio interface. So I could do that when I'm in Cakewalk, but it's handy because that is out of my reach. It's about 5 feet over there. To be able to get to that from right inside of the GUI is very useful to me. And then the other one is the FaderPort 8, which has all kinds of integration. This is a control surface. And so you can see me kind of adjusting the levels and that kind of thing. You can see as I go into individual ones, I can change my panning. I can change all kinds of things. I can control effects from here. I can control my transport. I can do my automation. I can move back and forward. I can turn on and off different parts of the interface. There's all kinds of things that I can do inside of Studio One that make it fun to use. So as an example of that, I'm turning off the editor and all those things. I can bring the mixer in and out. I can bring that browser in and out over there. I can bring that inspector in and out over here on the left. This is all happening from the FaderPort. I can do all of my transport controls, looping and all of that, all within the FaderPort. This works as a Mackie control as well in Cakewalk. It just doesn't have anywhere near as much integration as it does in Studio One. Whew. That's a lot of information. This is definitely the longest video that I have done to date. I hope that this comprehensive kind of review of differences between Cakewalk and Studio One has been useful to you. Please share this, like it. If you subscribe to the channel, I'd appreciate it. I'm trying to do more and more videos and get more information out to the regular people who are doing some recording at home on what they might want to use. So like I said, like this video, share it with other people. If you subscribe to the channel, your support is certainly appreciated here. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to watch this. Have a good one.